Diangelo manages to skillfully and unashamedly redefine racism so broadly that not a single white person can escape the label of racist. This goes to further strengthen my observation that for her, racism exists without the agency or permission of a white person, thus making it synonymous with the concept of original sin. By logic, then, it follows that only the sacrifice of whiteness, that is, the death of all white people on the altar of social justice, can ever remedy racism. In chapter 1 of her book, White Fragility, Robin Diangelo details our opinions on the challenges of talking to white people about race. I've decided to carefully take a deep dive into this chapter to see if there are any observable merits to her observation or arguments. Diangelo says, and I quote, "However, like most white people raised in the US, I was not taught to see myself in racial terms, and certainly not to draw attention to my race or to behave as if it mattered in any way. Of course, I was made aware that someone else's race mattered, and if race was discussed, it would be theirs, not mine. The way I see it, I agree with this statement of Diangelo. I believe it to be a true reflection of most white people's perspective about race. I've talked to some white friends of mine who have displayed similar sentiments of not seeing themselves in racial terms. And I also understand that people of color, a term that I hate but use here for the sake of understandability, are constantly being made aware of the race. When people constantly affirm that such and such things happen to black people because of the race, like the police are out there killing black men because of their race, then it becomes difficult for black people not to see themselves principally in racial terms. When being black becomes the most interesting and celebrated thing about a person, it becomes fashionable to declare and proclaim that blackness as a badge of honor. When Joe Biden made known his preference for a Supreme Court judge pick, he made it a point to mention her race and gender as though they were any significant factor in how she would dispense her duties. It would be beneficial, however, if little emphasis is placed on the race of others, as little an emphasis as is being placed on the white race. But Diangelo thinks differently. She thinks the solution is more white race consciousness rather than less black race consciousness. Diangelo wants white people to become conscious of their own race and associated privileges. I, on the other hand, propose the alternative position of the little emphasis being placed on the white race to be expanded to other racialized groups as well. I encourage other racialized groups to de-emphasize their race and not to make it a primary focus of their being. So rather than having a society that is racially hyper-focused, other more important parameters may become focal in addressing issues. There would be an incredible improvement in race relations if less and less emphasis is placed on the race of any group, which by the way is superficial and only skin deep. Dr. Sheena Mason is doing an excellent work in this regard. Her book on the theory of racelessness, which is now out on Amazon for rent, is an excellent tool to proceed in dismantling the primacy of race. Diangelo continues by writing, quote, "Yet our simplistic definition of racism as intentional acts of racial discrimination committed by immoral individuals engenders a confidence that we are not part of the problem, and that our learning is thus complete. This simplistic and narrow definition of racism should be the only acceptable definition of racism. The problem I see here now is that because of America's past and how that has contributed to some white people having a comparatively better socioeconomic standing than some blacks, Diangelo sees this as evidence of racism. In this regard, she is like Kendi, who believes disparity to be evidence of racism. It is incredibly naive to think that all or most of white people's achievements and privileges are predicated majorly on the subjugation of other races. For one to believe so is to discount the courage, bravery, ingenuity, and industry of many white people who came to America, conquered a virgin and inhospitable terrain to build a great nation. And same can be said for other immigrant groups as well, such as the Asians. Diangelo says, quote, "Individualism is a storyline that creates, communicates, reproduces, and reinforces the concept that each of us is a unique individual and that our group memberships, such as race, class, or gender, are irrelevant to our opportunities. She argues that the doctrine of individualism makes light of the fact that there is an uneven distribution of access to opportunities across racial lines. I believe this to be a narrow definition of individualism, even though it is the basic assumption of individualism that she states here. Individualism does not reduce achievements to solely personal efforts, but seek to de-emphasize race as a negligible contributing factor to success, such that a hardworking black person can compensate for any racial inequities and may become more successful than a mediocre white person, even with all his privilege. I understand this seems to be making the point for Diangelo that if every factor is held constant aside from race, then the white person would automatically come out on top based on the existence of white privilege. I would argue that even if theoretically true, it ever rarely is true that conditions are always the same for all people aside from race.
Hey, in case you didn't know, I wrote this totally kick-ass crime fiction novel, which also featured the debate on race and colonialism. One review describes it as fun and thought-provoking. You can get a copy on Amazon. The link is in the description below.
If there are inequities in employment, in access to education, in healthcare, these are policy issues and reflect a failure of government rather than pernicious white privilege or racism. Suppose Obama did not try to become president. Suppose he was content with lamenting the inequities and inevitable racial hurdles he would face in ascending the presidency, and there would never have been a black president in America. The point being made is that white privilege cannot hold back a serious-minded and determined black person, nor can it be the sole or major reason for the success of white people. As Imam Alfred puts it, those behind have to run twice as fast if they want to catch up with those ahead of them. If the discussion focuses on personal upliftment and responsibilities, it will be such that each successive generation of black people would become better and better than their forebears, and inequities would become negligible, if not even eradicated with time. It is incredibly narcissistic to think that one could socially engineer racial equity or outcomes. The idea of blaming white people for the standing of black people is paternalistic. It continues to wrongly assume that black people must be saved by white people, and that as long as white privilege exists, black people cannot break through the ceiling. If black people must wait till white people finish dealing with their white privilege or inherent racism, perhaps black people will never rise above their current condition. These theories make a messiah out of the white race, for it is by their action of eliminating their white privilege that black people can ever amount to anything. This not only infantilizes black people, it further seeks to elevate white people. Diangelo manages to skillfully and unashamedly redefine racism so broadly that not a single white person can escape the label of racist. This goes to further strengthen my observation that for her, racism exists without the agency or permission of a white person, thus making it synonymous with the concept of original sin. By logic, then, it follows that only the sacrifice of whiteness, that is, the death of all white people on the altar of social justice, can ever remedy racism. I'd like to hear what you think about this. Leave a comment in the comment section below, and do like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And I'll catch you in another video.